Hi from me, Lauren Joffe, and welcome to another episode of Derech Eretz. Language opens up a whole new world of communication. But what happens when you can't understand the language around you? Awaza aims to bridge gaps in the medical community, and Colin Nathan tells us about a month-long stay in a Russian hospital. First up, Rabbi Kievman tells us more.
Communication is not only the words we speak, the language. You know, there are various languages that we could communicate with. And in fact, I would say there's probably different types of conversation. There's casual conversation, which isn't necessarily as important. We could just be chit-chatting with each other and maybe talking about the weather, nothing significant. But then there are times when one really needs to pay attention and be present. We speak about the concept in Yiddish, Herren versus der Herren. Herren is to hear. There's lots of noise, there's things, and oftentimes we don't pay attention. But der Herren is to listen, to be focused, to be in the moment. Like when my child is talking to me, and I could hear with my ear. But if I'm distracted on my phone, as my son once said to me, "Dad, are you listening?" he asked. And I said, "Yes, sure." And he says, "But you're not listening with your eyes." Communication requires that aspect of being connected, that you see each other and speak with each other, paying attention. And I think of when God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai. The Torah uses the word kol, the voice of God, 5 times. And it's fascinating because there is a very famous book out there called The 5 Love Languages. And in this book, the author describes what he observed in marriage therapy, the way couples communicate with each other. 5 languages of love. And so different people, of course, have different ways of communicating with one another, different languages. But we have to be on the same page and speaking the same language. So for example, he says, some people communicate with gifts, right? They're expressing their love, their affection for another with gifts that they give. Another aspect, call it the second level language of love, he says is affirmations. When people use words to articulate their gratitude, their appreciation to their loved ones. A third category mentioned is being of service to another. And so you can do things, acts of kindness, of helping, of being there. It's a language, an expression of love. Number 4 is physical touch. An embrace, a kiss, a hug, touching another is a very powerful language of love. And number 5, my friends, is spending quality time with one another. Now the thing is, if I speak the language of quality time and you speak the language of gifts, then although I'm giving you a present, I'm not being present. So the greatest presence we could give our family is our physical presence. But in the very same way as this book describes the 5 languages of love, I think from a Torah perspective, the fact that the Torah uses 5 times the word kol to describe God's language, perhaps it's telling us about our relationship with the Almighty. That also we can communicate to God with these 5 languages of love. So let's review them quickly. Number 1 was gifts. When we give charity, when we are kind and hospitable and generous, we are using the language of gifts. Number 2, affirmations. When we pray, when we express our gratitude to the Almighty, starting our day, every day, starting with thanks, with acknowledgement for the good that God gives us. Number 3 was service. When we do the mitzvahs, when we fulfill God's commandments, we are being of service to Hashem. Number 4, touch. That physical touch. When a man dons tefillin, that's a physical touch. When a lady lights the Shabbos candles, these are examples of being physically involved and engaged in the mitzvahs you do. And finally, number 5 is the quality time. When we observe Shabbos, it's an oasis in time, that tranquility of Shabbos. We spend time with Hashem. When we study Torah, we do exactly the same. So there's just nothing more valuable and precious to our loved ones than being present, being focused, and paying attention when we speak. That is the greatest communication and language we could speak to one another.
want you to focus primarily on your jab first, your left side first, cross, which is your right hand, and back on your left side. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, start position,
Back.
and position, and shoulder.
So 1, 2, 3, and back.
Hands tight, good, do it again.
1, 2, 3, and back.
And I'm happy with that.
So right now, Colin Nathan is showing me how to throw a punch here at Hotbox Gym. And believe it or not, a few months ago, he was stuck in a Russian hospital for 4 weeks with COVID. So today we're going to chat to him, learning a little bit about his journey and how he managed to navigate that language barrier.
I'm Joburg based, but the heart's still in Cape Town. And obviously still love the mother city. Had my bar mitzvah in Marais Roadshaw. And as you can see, my facility here in Johannesburg is in Savoy State, right opposite a synagogue, Chabad Savoy. So it's just great, obviously, being involved in a sport that back in the 1920s and 1930s was dominated by Jews. And now it's a rarity to find Jewish people in a very brutal but beautiful sport of boxing. And I've been very fortunate. I've traveled the world for what I do and for what I love. And Russia was one of the countries obviously in my list that I wanted to do. And I went last year and we had an event. And one of the events was boxing and we had the main event. So I took my athlete Rainer Liebenberg over with our team. And we flew in, and then because the weigh-in was for dignitaries and so forth, it was only the athlete and the manager allowed to go. So the two of us had to go for a COVID test. He tested negative, and unfortunately I tested positive. By Russian law, I had to be, checked out by a Russian government-approved doctor, and then obviously taken to a Russian hospital for overnight observation with more testing. So I got literally ushered from my hotel into this ambulance. And when I was ushered into the ambulance, Oksana, the GM from the hotel, but she was acting as a translator for me, decided to come with me. And I said to her, why are you coming with? And she's like, you can't speak Russian and you're going to need to kind of know what's going on. But when I got dropped off at the hospital, she was not allowed to come in with me. And it was just crazy. And then of course I did test positive again, and I spent 4 weeks in a Russian hospital on my back being COVID positive and really, really sick. It was crazy. First thing I did was when I put my shoulder back down was I tried to see if there's Wi-Fi. And there was Wi-Fi, but I couldn't connect. So when the two nurses came in broken English, they were trying to tell me that the Wi-Fi wasn't working, but I could see the Wi-Fi was working. So that stage I actually went out because I actually lost my cool because I needed to communicate with my family. At this stage, people are panicking, and they were going to see the fight. Colin wasn't in the corner, what's going on? So I got into the Wi-Fi and I managed, and that was the lifesaver for me because with the Wi-Fi, I could use Google Translate. So that made my life a lot easier. So the GM of the hotel we were staying at was a Peter Land Hotel in St. Petersburg. Her name was Oksana, and she was just wonderful to me. She eventually brought food for me on a daily basis from the hotel, and I needed supplements because the food in the hospital was it was ghastly. I mean, I couldn't eat it. She was speaking to the doctors to make sure that I was being looked after. By this stage, I called my ex-wife and I called my wife, and obviously they had to know that I was, in a Russian hospital with COVID. And the next thing, I think the power of being a Jew is something very special. People need to realize that because I'm not a religious Jew, but I'm very proud to be Jewish. And the next thing, Rabbi Ash, whose synagogue is directly across from my gym here in Savoy State in Johannesburg, got onto the phone to the chief rabbi of Russia, to the Chabad rabbi of St. Petersburg, and by the time the head unit, the doctor, the head unit of my hospital came in to introduce himself, he said to me, he walked in, he said, "Are you Colin Nathan?" I said, "Yes." He goes, because he could speak English, he was like, "I've had a lot of people phoning me about you." So it was like, he kind of got briefed, like, there's a South African guy there, make sure he lives, we need him alive, that kind of thing. So it's very funny. But the rabbi ended up phoning me and he said to me, "Look, do you need to fill in?" I said, "My stuff's been locked up. They've had to spray my room that I was in because I was positive. It'd be great if you could lend me a pair." So literally, On a Monday and a Thursday, food would be brought in for me from Chabad. And great food, by the way, not just, ordinary food, with the Seder Tefillin. So Tefillin is a ritual prayer that there's two components to it. One goes on your head and one goes on your left side of your arm, which is close to your heart. And the prayer on your head is to control or to be in line with the thoughts of your brain. And it's something I've been doing since, I think I've been doing it for the last 23 years, and it's just been part of me. And I would do that every day. And it's something, it's part of, I don't want to say it's cultural, it's just something spiritually that I like to do. I just feel that it uplifts me and it creates a positive feeling for my day. And I feel less complete when I don't do it. Communication isn't always done by talking and by language. But in this scenario, and this situation that I was in, it became crucial to know kind of where I was at in terms of my health. But, the vulnerability of not speaking Russian did come into play. And if it wasn't for Wi-Fi, I'm not sure I would have understood the process that I was going through there. And I did not know the medication I was being given, because everything was in Russian. So with Wi-Fi, I could send pictures through to South Africa, and a good close mate of mine is married to a Russian woman, and she could translate what was the medication I was taking, and she could basically tell me. Again, it became a situation of being so codependent on Google Translate in terms of my health and well-being that it was almost like part of me. So like a nurse would come in, and I would need something for the fever or the pain that I was experiencing. So I remember saying very slowly on my phone, please, can you give me something for my fever? Translate into Russian, and the Russian would da, which means yes, no problem. So I think the biggest lesson that I've learned throughout the whole language issue being in Russian, obviously not being able to speak Russian or do sign language, not that anyone would have been able to know about that, is the fact that especially when I was admitted to the hospital, that not speaking Russian and not them being able to speak fluent English and everything was kind of broken up, it could be very frustrating, very, very frustrating. And you pick up on energies. It's interesting because people can be very dismissive if they don't understand you and vice versa. And I think that was my issue. Before I was able to get onto the Wi-Fi and obviously use Google Translate, there was a lot of energy that wasn't so positive because we couldn't understand each other, and that was very frustrating. And I think if I get into a situation again like that and a person can't understand me, I don't think I'm going to be dismissive or upset. I think I'm going to be a little bit more understanding and have a little bit more patience. I don't think I had patience when I was admitted to the hospital, and that was because I was vulnerable. So my Derech Eretz is just being grateful for being on this planet, because it was a very traumatic experience, especially when you're lying isolated by yourself, vulnerable, and you think of things like, what happens if I die? And you make it out, and you're very fortunate to see your family and see your kids. And I think the biggest lesson I took from being in that Russian hospital was never take anything for granted. The most basic things of literally being able to go and buy a cup of coffee, to getting a tube of toothpaste, to getting up to a basin to brush your teeth. I think that's probably one of the biggest things I come out of taking from being in a Russian hospital for 4 weeks on my back.
Imagine getting some of the most important information about yourself in a language that you don't totally understand. Well, Glenn Stein realized that this is a massive problem in South Africa, especially within the healthcare sector. So today we find out a little bit more about Glenn himself, but also exactly how and why the app Aweza was created.
Aweza is an umbrella initiative that seeks to leverage technology to address language barriers in South Africa in various sectors. So in the lifetime of Aweza, we focused predominantly on education and healthcare. So language barriers are why a lot of students underperform in that. So we were trying to support that process by creating an e-learning platform that focuses on terminology development as well as mathematical concept development. But then closer to my heart was the second project, which for me was the flagship of Aweza, which was Aweza Med. This was focused on addressing language barriers in the healthcare sector. So, typically if a healthcare practitioner is first language English or Afrikaans speaker, and their patient is, speaks any of the, other South African native languages. So if they don't understand each other properly, that can really hinder the consultation process, which means, the doctor or the nurse might not properly understand the patient and not be able to diagnose them properly, and the patient might not feel comfortable or heard or understood. And there's like a trust issue that comes up and a negative, and that can lead to a negative patient experience. And again, this is quite a prevalent issue in South Africa in a lot of healthcare facilities. So I partnered with the CSIR, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, who developed this really cool text-to-speech synthesis engine for South African languages, and also a machine translation engine. So together we built this app which basically enabled a healthcare practitioner to run a consultation with the patient in the patient's mother tongue and field responses through the app. So the app would act as like an intermediary with which the patient and the healthcare practitioner could better understand each other to, improve healthcare outcomes, increase understanding, and just, create a more positive experience for the patients. I believe it's important to bridge language gaps and communication barriers because, in order to survive and get by in society, we need to be able to understand what people are saying to us and what people need to understand what we're saying. And it's easy. It was always easy for me to take that for granted growing up being a first language English speaker. Learning any of those other languages was not a necessity, therefore it wasn't even something on my mind. Didn't need it to survive. Whereas someone who doesn't speak English as a first language comes to Cape Town and they're going to have a very difficult time and they're going to struggle in ways we couldn't imagine. So I think, language is an issue of survival in some cases, especially in the healthcare sector. And I do know, anecdotally, I know that patients really enjoyed when the app spoke in their language, and the reaction when you hear this like synthesized voice in closer speaking was always like, on the few consultations I was able to be a part of and was given permission to be a part of, it was like so validating to see people just like light up their eyes and mouth and smile like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And it definitely was nice to feel more understood. And then, healthcare practitioners saying things like, I felt really empowered. It made me feel like I could speak the patient's language, which I couldn't before. So a lot of nice things like that. But if, that makes it worth it. But if I could know that a life was saved through that, I would say that made 3 years of really pouring, my apps, my everything, my blood, sweat, and tears, just, going everything, all the pain that came with trying to do something like this full time for 3 years. I would make all of it worth it, no question. Being a part of the Jewish community, growing up surrounded by Jewish people contribute quite a bit to my journey in building this project. For example, I went to Herzliya, and in the Herzliya there's a strong emphasis on, even though we were a Jewish school and all my friends, bar like a handful, were white Jews, there's a lot of teaching about, you know, being mindful of the community you live in, and not just your Jewish community, but the greater Cape Town and South African, you know, community context. A lot of emphasis on independent thought and you know, questioning and you know, everything. And from that, I got a lot of confidence in myself. I think I was, you know, brought up in an environment that fostered belief, self-belief, and you know, a lot of this kind of just the drive to go out and do things, and you know, against against the norm, going against the grain, having the sense of, you know, I will be fine. I am, you know, I've got this support structure to fall back onto somehow, and that helps a lot. And I mean, you know, not everyone has that, so it's very easy to, you know, to talk about being an entrepreneur and trying to encourage people to go do it, but it's much harder if you don't have a support structure. So I think just all of that really just created this very fertile ground, you know, which nurtured my ability and belief and confidence to go and chase this vision I had. I'd say my Derech Eretz was to use my skills in software engineering to build tools that could aid socioeconomic development in South Africa. And as part of my future, being, you know, more projects like, you know, Aweza, you know, even if it's something I do on the side, I'm always going to be thinking about how I can make a difference, what I can build that will be cool and interesting and fun to build and useful for people and helpful to people, to communities, even if it's, you know, communities at parts of the world I've never been to.
Well, we've come to the end of the show for this week's episode of Derech Eretz. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so please send us a Facebook message at Derech Eretz Connect. From me, Lauren Jaffe, and the Derech Eretz team, have a beautiful week.